Hello and welcome to Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. Murder, the type of murder we talk about here in the true crime community, is always senseless, but there are cases that are especially sad because they are especially senseless. This is one of those cases. When two kids stopped at a friend's house for a visit, they had no way of knowing they were in the presence of a monster or that they were living their last day on Earth. This is the story of the mine shaft murders. Let's get into it. January 2nd, 2018. The families of two teenagers wake up very concerned. They are missing two of their own and they are convinced something is very wrong. They contacted the authorities and reported their loved ones missing, but it would be months before they knew what had happened to their family members. 17-year-old Brelynne Otteson, who went by Breezy, and 18-year-old Riley Powell were on a road trip. The two were a couple, they were in love, and they were enjoying spending time together over Christmas break. They had fallen in love, bonding over the fact that both of them had overcome some really serious personal struggles. Breezy lost her mother in a car crash, and she had been really struggling with that huge loss for years. Breezy was a fun-loving girl. She was outspoken, but she struggled with her own insecurities, and she had a hard time believing that she was worthy of being loved, but Riley loved her. Riley made Breezy happy, and she did the same for him. Riley loved playing basketball and going off-roading, but mainly he loved spending time with Breezy. Riley, too, had overcome some serious challenges. He had been sent to a boys' home after he brought a gun to school. He always insisted that the gun was for hunting rabbits after class, but he got in a lot of trouble for bringing that gun. He ended up changing schools, but he did graduate, and he had been working as a plumber. The couple was living with Riley's father in Eureka, Utah, which is a little mining town that sits amongst sandy-colored hills that used to be home to hundreds of mines, now abandoned mine shafts. Eureka sits about 75 miles south of Salt Lake City, and Riley and Breezy were headed back there after being out of town for a bit. The family members that reported Riley and Breezy missing knew where they had been, and they also knew where they were headed the last time they heard from them. Riley had an ex-girlfriend named Morgan. Even though Riley and Morgan had broken up, they remained good friends, and they often spoke and even saw each other on occasion. As Riley and Breezy drove back towards Eureka to go home, they decided to stop at Morgan's house and say hi. Now, Morgan Henderson, who also goes by Morgan Lewis, is 34 years old. That surprised me to hear a 34-year-old woman had been dating an 18-year-old man, but this is the story. Riley and Breezy got to Morgan's home that was outside of Eureka in Mammoth, Utah, and the three were sitting around having a beer, smoking some pot, and catching up. Morgan shared the home with her boyfriend, 41-year-old Jerrod Baum. We need to talk a little about Jerrod Baum before we proceed. Jerrod Baum, he's a piece of shit. He's a white supremacist, and he's a racist, and he's a total loser, and he's just one of those people that, frankly, the world would be a better place without. On November 6, 1991, when Jerrod was only 15 years old, he robbed an Orem, Utah fast food restaurant at gunpoint. Not only did he rob the restaurant, but he fired on the employees that were just doing their jobs there. So, you know what I'm going to say. What was he doing out of jail? Okay, he was 15 years old when he did that. So no, we can't keep him in jail forever for something he did when he was 15. But the flip side of that is most 15-year-olds are tagging and breaking curfew and smoking pot if they get in trouble. Not Jerrod Baum. He was committing armed robbery and shooting at people. I bitch and moan about this all the time here, but don't you think that someone with that kind of a record should be monitored somehow? Shouldn't we have some kind of a system in place on these kinds of people that we know are dangerous, that we know have violent tendencies, to check on them once in a while? I'm all for freedom, I'm all for second chances, and I am all about civil rights. But what about rehabilitation? What bothers me is just turning people like this back out on the street with absolutely no follow-up. This was the case, as it so often is. Jerrod Baum was just out, free in the world, being a racist piece of shit and abusing people. I found this weird story that I don't quite understand. In 2002, Jerrod's parole officer recorded in his file that when he asked Jerrod what he was doing for work, Jerrod told him, collecting taxes for drug dealers, meaning he was beating people up who owed drug dealers money. You tell your probation officer this? And like, they just write it in your file? Like, this is what I can't understand. If anybody knows more about this, please feel free to comment because I'm very confused. Was the parole officer just like, well, as long as you're employed, sounds good. See you next time. I couldn't find any information on why Jerrod thought that was something he should tell his parole officer or why there was no follow-up. Jerrod even tells his probation officer that he used the name Chris and told people he was from California when he was working as a hitman. He claims he had beaten people up in Utah County as well as in Cedar City, which is my hometown. Cedar has like more cows than people. I think some guy rolling into town calling himself Chris from California and beating people up, I don't know. Seems like something somebody might notice. But anyway, this is part of the story. Jerrod Baum is into something called Ottesonism, which apparently used to be kind of a fascination with Vikings and Nordic history, but not anymore. Now, Ottesonism is a racist brand of neo-paganism, and they use images of like fierce Viking warriors and hunting animals with their uber white women as possessions. Yeah, I cannot. Not only is Jerrod a racist garbage person, he's also abusive. Morgan said that Jerrod would cut her and then use her own blood to draw runes and symbols on her naked body, telling her that this bound them together forever, and that if she ever left him, he would do it again, but the next time it would be with someone else's blood if he did. That's healthy in a relationship. That's totally normal. My husband drew symbols on me with my own blood like 3 days ago. It's just a regular Tuesday night, right? But apparently, because of Morgan's personality, her history, she bought into all of this, and she was kind of a believer that these symbols had some kind of power over her, and she was afraid of Jerrod. But apparently at times, even though she was afraid of him, she broke some of his rules. And on the day Riley and Breezy visited her, she broke one of his big ones. Morgan knew that Jerrod would be mad about Riley being in her house, but she also knew that Jerrod was supposed to be out for the night. Well, somehow Jerrod found out that there was a car in his driveway. I'm assuming somebody called him or something, and he came storming home early. As Riley, Breezy, and Morgan sat talking in the home's living room, Jerrod Baum threw the front door open. He stormed into the house, he looked at Morgan, and he said, "I told you couldn't have any guy friends." Sounds about right. Totally intimidated by other men. Sure. Jerrod flew into a rage, and although I couldn't find information to verify this, I personally think he must have had Morgan's help in what he did next. She later claimed that she was terrified and scared of Jerrod, and I'm sure that she was. But she definitely could have done more than she did to prevent what happened next. Jerrod bound Riley and Breezy's hands and feet, and he duct taped their mouths shut. He then dragged both of them out to his Jeep, put them inside, and came back in the house and told Morgan, "Get outside, get in the car." Jerrod then started driving to the outskirts of town, and he stopped the Jeep out in the hills of a remote area on the edge of a cliff. Breezy was crying, and at this point, she looked at Jerrod and she said, "I'm pregnant." That didn't matter to Jerrod Baum. He forced both Riley and Breezy to their knees, and Breezy and Morgan watched as he beat Riley Powell severely. He then pulled out a knife and stabbed Riley over and over. He dragged him over to a mine shaft and he pushed him down it. As Riley fell, Jerrod leaned over the mine shaft and waved and said, "Goodbye, Riley." Jerrod then walked over to Breezy, who was sobbing. She said, "I promise I won't tell anyone." Jerrod looked at her and said, "It's okay, darling," and then he slit her throat. He picked her up and he dropped her down the mine shaft where she landed next to Riley. He turned to Morgan and said, "Like lambs to the slaughter, they didn't even fight." Oh, my blood is just boiling right now. No, they didn't fight you, you 40-year-old old man. They were just kids. This person doing this to these kids who did absolutely nothing to him, who just stopped by to see their friend. I hate these people. I really do. They make me so angry. You think you're entitled to take someone's life because of your stupid, antiquated belief system or because they do something you don't like or whatever the reason is. I can't stand them. They make me mad. Think about if this was your kids, your sister, brother, niece, or nephew. Yeah. Jerrod later said that he made Riley suffer, but that he felt bad about Brelynne, so he made her death quick and painless. Because he'll decide. You see what I mean? He'll decide how things are going to go. He's the big man. He's in charge. Yeah. Jerrod got back into the Jeep and he and Morgan drove off, leaving Riley and Breezy to die in the mine shaft. January 9th, 2018. After a week of investigation, reviewing phone records, and speaking with Riley and Breezy's family members, authorities are quite sure they know who is responsible. They went to the home of Jerrod and Morgan and they questioned both of them. They tell them that they know Riley and Breezy were at their home on the night of December 29th into the early morning hours of December 30th. But both Jerrod and Morgan deny that. They said they never saw the couple. Jerrod Baum and Morgan Henderson tell the police that Riley and Breezy hadn't been getting along and that they heard they had gotten into a fight on New Year's Eve. They told the cops they hadn't heard from them and they had no idea where they would be. They made up stories about what they had been doing on the night of the 29th and claimed none of it involved seeing Riley or Breezy. 2 days later, on January 11th, Riley Powell's Jeep was found about a mile south of Cherry Creek Reservoir. Someone had broken tree branches and used them to cover the Jeep to hide it, and the Jeep had 2 flat tires. Crime scene investigators were brought in and evidence was collected from the Jeep. At this point, everyone who is looking for Riley and Breezy have very little hope. They would have heard from them by now. They would have been home by now. Finding the Jeep was confirmation that they would probably never see their loved ones alive again. On January 15th, police served a search warrant at Riley's mother's house. I couldn't really find any information on why they chose to go there, but I'm assuming it was just part of the investigation. They were looking for anything they could find. Juab County Sheriff Doug Anderson released a statement to the press that said the condition and location of the Jeep was highly suspicious and that foul play was strongly suggested. On January 25th, police bring Morgan Henderson in for an interview. Again, she claims the teens never even visited her home on the night of December 29th. But this time, the police press her. They tell her that they have evidence proving Riley and Breezy had been at her house and that she needs to come clean. After hours of questioning, Morgan finally admits that yes, Riley and Breezy had been at her house, but that they left and that she has no idea what happened to them. So at this point, Morgan is not only a liar, she's an accomplice. All she had to do was go straight to the police the morning after the murders and tell the cops what Jerrod had done. He would have been arrested and she would have been safe from him and free from him. I get that there is an element of brainwashing and fear involved in abusive relationships. I do. I have been in one myself. But let's just be honest. If Morgan really wanted to help, she wouldn't weeks later still be denying the truth, right? Morgan has a son and she says that she was worried about his safety, and I get that. But had she told them what Jerrod did, he would have been locked up and away from them. They still couldn't get Morgan to come completely clean, and weeks go by and then a couple of months. Police continue to work on the case, but they're stuck. They don't have enough to arrest Morgan or Jerrod, and it all begins to look like the case will go cold. March 25th, 2018. Morgan Henderson is pulled over for speeding. For whatever reason, the cop senses something is off with her and he searches her car. Morgan had drugs and she had weapons in the car. She was arrested. She is taken to jail. And now, when she needs to help herself, she is willing to tell what she knows. Morgan tells the police the story, the details that I have relayed to you of what happened on that night. It's actually because of Morgan that we know exactly what happened to the couple. Morgan then told the police that she would lead them to Riley and Breezy's bodies. They headed out to a remote area of Utah County and arrived at what is known as the Tintic Standard Mine, which has long been abandoned. Authorities lowered lights and a camera down to the bottom of the mine, and the camera returned images of 2 bodies laying about 100 feet down in the mine. The process of retrieving the bodies began, and soon they were on the surface. Both Riley and Breezy had their hands tied behind their backs, and both had stab wounds. The following day, on March 28th, Jerrod Baum was arrested. 2 days later, Morgan was arrested on suspicion of obstruction of justice. On that same day, the medical examiner made a positive identification, and the public was told that the bodies found in the mine shaft are those of Riley and Breezy.
Rarely are these streets the setting for a major crime. November 6, 1991 was one of those days. Police said a 15-year-old boy who had been suspected in multiple car thefts robbed an Orem fast food restaurant at gunpoint and then fired on workers who followed him into the parking lot. That teenager grew into a man who 26 years later now stands accused of his most serious crimes yet.
He's being held on 2 counts each of aggravated murder, aggravated kidnapping.
Jerrod Baum, according to a police affidavit, tied up Riley Powell and Breezy Otteson, killed them with a knife, and then dumped their bodies in a mine in a remote corner of Utah County.
Why do you have so much hate?
Yeah, why?
The affidavit said Baum had warned his girlfriend not to have men over to the house when he wasn't there, and told her it was too bad they came over because he had never, quote, killed an innocent before. Baum made Riley suffer, the girlfriend told police.
You don't kill kids for jealousy, and
That's what it was, yeah.
Baum's lengthy rap sheet also includes multiple weapons violations and rioting when he was in prison. But these crimes,
this doesn't make sense.
No, none of them make sense.
family members and cops alike are left to guess what in Baum's road through life led him to this avenue.
How could somebody be that mad because someone was over there? I mean, what the heck? There's 2 kids that had their whole life ahead of them gone.
On April 3, 2018, Jerrod Baum was charged with first-degree murder in the deaths of Riley and Breezy, along with a string of other felonies related to the crime. 2 days later, Morgan is charged with 2 second-degree felonies related to obstruction of justice. A year goes by as procedural hearings are postponed and attorneys are jostled and all of the other things that happen. On June 10, 2019, Jerrod Baum pled not guilty and the court went about setting dates for the trial to begin. And then, of course, the pandemic hit and everything was delayed. Now, during this delay, Jerrod Baum's biological sister went in to visit him at prison, and the two had not seen each other since they were toddlers. At this visit, Jerrod and his sister sat and talked, and the police were listening. Jerrod starts telling his sister about his tattoos. He tells her, "I got my little gravestones right here," and then he laughed. Well, investigators become interested in Jerrod's tattoos. I won't bother to list them all, but as you can see here in these graphics, there are many of them. None done too well, that's for sure. Authorities get a warrant to look at all of Jerrod's tattoos. They find the usual crap, lots of white supremacy stuff, lots of Viking Nordic worship, and numbers that are tied to racism. Why do these people bother? What is the point of racism? You can't just let somebody live their life and be who they are. You're so threatened. You're such a small person that people just being different from you. I'm on one today. I read a news article this morning that just kind of put me in a mood. The police are convinced that some of Jerrod's tattoos are linked to the death of an inmate from when he was in jail around 17 years old, when he was in jail for the armed robbery. In 1994, an inmate named Lonnie Blackmon, who was black, was stabbed and killed while incarcerated in Utah. Another inmate named Troy Kell actually committed the murder, but police have always believed that Jerrod Baum not only helped make the weapon he was stabbed with, but held it after the murder. Jerrod Baum is just a bad guy. He's been doing bad things his entire life. Authorities take the photos of Jerrod Baum's tattoos to an expert in this particular subculture, and his analysis reads, Mr. Baum's tattoos demonstrate his adopted ideologies as well as document his history in going into and out of white supremacist organizations. Based on my consultation with experts, it appears that the murders committed by Baum have a relation to Mr. Baum's radical views. He used runes in a dark manner to try and control Ms. Henderson, and when that didn't work, he resorted to extreme violence. The use of runes is part of many white supremacist organizations. The view of women as subservient to men and as subject to their control is also part of many white supremacist ideologies, and both of these aspects of white supremacist ideology appear to have relation to the killing of Riley and Breezy. I find it nauseating. Finally, on May 7th, 2022, 3.5 years after their deaths, the trial for Riley and Breezy's murders began. The trial has been ongoing for a month now. I actually log into the courts on some mornings and I've been watching it. During the trial, a witness was brought in who had done time with Jerrod Baum. This man is Billy Connect, and he said that on one night in jail, they were watching a true crime show, and they started talking about how they would dispose of a body if they ever killed someone. In the trial, Billy Connect testified that Jerrod Baum told him, "I know exactly what I'd do. I'd throw them down a mine shaft." Apparently, Billy Connect saw Jerrod Baum on the news years later for this case, and he heard that Jerrod was being accused of exactly what he said he would do all those years ago in jail, so Billy came forward and told authorities what he knew.
And prosecutors seek to add the testimony of Billy Connect. In 2017, both spent time together in the Weber County Jail, and Connect claims they'd often talk.
We were watching like a true crime TV show. And it was just a hypothetical conversation, like if you ever killed someone, where would you stash the bodies?
What did he say?
He said he would hide them in a mine shaft.
Did he explain why?
He said that where he lived, there was a lot of abandoned mine shafts.
This trial is still ongoing. I am recording this video in mid-April, and right now we do not know the outcome of the trial. Just a few days ago, the prosecution rested its case, and now it's time for the defense to take over. Before the prosecution rested, it played audio recordings of Jerrod Baum in jail talking to his new girlfriend. She told him that someone is walking around Eureka, his former town, and is ripping down Justice for Riley and Breezy posters. And Jerrod laughed and said something really vulgar that I don't want to repeat here. The prosecution wanted the jury to hear who Jerrod Baum is when he thinks no one is listening. And that's the reason that they played this recording for them. We will have to wait and see how the defense does. This video of mine won't be posted for a couple of weeks, so I'm going to end this episode a little differently today. I'm going to stop here in the story, and then I'll be back to add on to this episode before I post it and let you know how it all came out. After both sides presented their cases and both sides rested, Jerrod Baum's fate was placed in the hands of the jury. They went into deliberation, and they deliberated for several days. The death penalty was not on the table for Jerrod Baum because of negotiations that his attorneys had entered into with the prosecution. The jury found Jerrod Baum guilty. Guilty of 2 counts of aggravated murder, guilty of 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping, guilty of 2 counts of desecration of a body, and guilty of obstruction of justice. Bill Powell, Riley's father, spoke after the verdict. He said, "The death penalty was taken away from us, and that's what we wanted. This is the next best thing, so we don't have any complaints, at least I don't." Breezy's aunt, Amanda Davis, said that the moment they heard the first guilty, it was like a weight was lifted off their shoulders and they felt they were going to get justice. The families reported they were starting to get a little bit nervous because the jury was taking some time. Usually when a jury comes back quickly, that's a bad sign for the defendant. And sometimes when it's taking a little longer, that can mean, they're arguing. But in this case, it seems like they were just being thorough because as the judge polled each juror, they agreed he was guilty. Sentencing will not take place until June, so I will do a little short or something to give you guys an update to find out what kind of time Jerrod Baum gets. I think we can all agree there's only one right outcome here, and that's that he spends the rest of his life in prison. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. Like the video if you liked the video, and subscribe to the channel if you want to support me. It helps a lot. Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.